All right, so as I mentioned earlier, the topic of today's presentation is dialogue and disaffiliation, and it will be by Father Joe and myself. Why are we here? Well, we are here to learn how to recognize disaffiliation in others, especially youth and young adults, and in ourselves. Disaffiliation is something that we may find as we go through and we learn about this, that we go through at times as well. We're here to learn some basics regarding dialogue, especially as it relates to those who are struggling with disaffiliation. We're here to learn about some different types of disaffiliation and things we may say and do that may be both helpful and hurtful to individuals experiencing this. And we're here to learn to listen to one another and those experiencing disaffiliation. So what is disaffiliation? Well, if we look at the Oxford Online Dictionary definition, it's the act of ending the link between a group, a company, or an organization and a larger one. In this case, we are speaking of a person and the Catholic Church, Christianity, or even organized religion altogether. The information for this presentation comes from a study by St. Mary's Press called Going, Going, Gone. That was a very intensive study done with young people that basically had left the church or did not identify with a religion. Disaffiliation does not necessarily mean that a young person has stopped attending church, but simply that a young person has stopped identifying. You might find that someone is active within the church. They may be attending faith formation classes. They may be attending youth ministry. But if you hand them a form and ask them what faith they are, they may say none. It's how someone sees themselves. There are three main ways of experiencing disaffiliation. A person may experience one or all of them. The median age of disaffiliation is 13. So basically, if you have a faith formation class of high school students, you're probably looking at some disaffiliation. And it is a process, not a singular point in time. Whenever we enter into dialogue, it's always good to have some agreements before entering into dialogue. So I wanted to start before we go too far into any sort of dialogue and at least set some agreements. And these can be dynamic. If we need to add some as this 4-week series goes on, we certainly can. But these were some that I felt would be a good starting point. So as we enter into dialogue for these 4 weeks, I hope that we can all agree to listen to understand. Do not listen to answer. Ask questions to clarify. So in other words, don't assume that maybe you know what a person means or try to fill in blanks. Ask questions if you're not sure. Assume good intent. It is never a good thing to enter into dialogue assuming that the other person has a bad agenda. If you find yourself feeling frustrated, take a Franciscan pause. This is something that Carolyn Towns talks a lot about. And a Franciscan pause in person can be as simple as saying, you know what, hold that thought, I have to go to the bathroom. It is the easiest way to take a pause in the conversation. And avoid stereotypes. I think some of the easiest stereotypes that we find when talking about youth and young adult ministry is, you know, kids these days. Or the one that I talk about a lot is, you're just a kid. Someone may mean that very nicely, but I hear something very different when I hear that. So avoiding stereotypes is very important. So I mentioned earlier that we have 3 types of disaffiliation. We have the drifters, the dissenters, and the injured. And this is kind of the order that we'll meet these groups as we go through our series. The drifters. Some of the characteristics of the drifter experience is they do not think faith matters or makes a difference. They may lack social support in their journey with God. They may believe that church is made up of meaningless rules and rituals. They have often lacked compassion on their spiritual journey. They find faith practice is not essential to happiness or a purpose in life. Many often stop affiliating when they stop being required to go to church. And some of the things that I bring up here are important to understand, because sometimes when we speak to people and we talk about, higher meanings of things, if we're trying to point out, well, finding God is a higher purpose in life, not saying anybody uses those exact phrases, and you're speaking to a drifter who's already decided, I don't need faith to be happy, then that's kind of a counterproductive conversation, because the person that you're dialoguing with and you are not dialoguing with the same values in mind. So it's important to understand the person that you're speaking with. And that goes back to one of the agreements, which is listen to understand. Then we come to the dissenters. The dissenters disagree with one or some of the teachings. The dissenters may even be educated in theology and have read the Bible. They may have been belittled or ignored when they ask their pastor questions about difficult topics. The discrepancies between science and religion may have troubled some. And again, these questions may not have been answered adequately. I know in this group, we have a few science people and a few math people. And it's not so much that science and religion can't go together. It's how they go together in our own hearts and minds. But I know, for instance, in my own journeys, I met someone who had some of these questions in Catholic school in his younger years and found himself in detention. So that was a very negative experience for him. So some of these things are not the fact that they're asked, they're how they're handled when they're asked. Then we go to the injured. The injured probably takes the most compassion and the most empathy to dialogue with, but are probably the most important. Never should we come to one of these groups with an agenda of we must bring them back to the church. But it's about love and empathy. And that is something that we as Franciscans certainly should understand, especially with this group. Love and empathy is probably the most important part of that dialogue. This group is injured or have a perceived injury by the church or someone representing it. That injury may have been worsened by others taking a less than pastoral approach to this. It could be something like a death of a young relative, judgmental attitudes which exclude, for instance, with the LGBT population. Despite prayers, a person they knew did not heal. To a much younger person, that can be devastating, especially if they turn around and then the next person comes along and says, well, it's God's will. Come on, feel better. That's not a very pastoral approach. Knowing someone involved in the sexual abuse crisis. When I lived a little further up north, I'd never really met anybody. When I moved down here and lived south of Boston, I found I met a lot of people who knew somebody that were touched by that or within 2 degrees of separation. Being a minority in a culturally insensitive parish, or being a woman in a gender insensitive parish. These are all things that can cause injury or perceived injury. You know, I'll tell you, down south, I know of at least one church where one of my professors went, and she had her 2 daughters, and they were both really excited to get to a new place. She was a new professor at school, and her daughters went up and volunteered to become altar servers, and were immediately told by a very staunch priest that girls did not altar serve in his parish. So while we may not have some of those experiences up here in the north, there are some places that still have some of those experiences. What do these groups have in common? There's certainly a lack of dialogue. There's certainly a lack of relationship. There's certainly a lack of compassion. So now my questions when we go into dialogue are, do you know who they are in your parish? Or not just your parish, but even your community? Can you identify or empathize with any of these feelings? Is it safe to say we go through some of these things at all stages in our spiritual journey? And what is missing that is taking today's young people from disaffiliation to gone? You know, if we can say, all right, there are times I felt some of these things within my faith journey, but I'm still here. What is different for us that wasn't different for that young person? And the second part of that question is, what can we do to try to fill that void? For any youth and young adults here, and this is just some things that I put here in case we had some, we are here to listen. And these are some things to keep in your mind should we have any during the 4-week series. What you have to say to us is valuable, not because we want to keep you in the church, but because we love you and want to hear you. We will not try to convince you to do anything. If you feel that we are, please tell us. Please do not feel that you must answer anything that is asked of you. Please only share what you are comfortable sharing. Please know that above all, you are loved because you are a human being and we are here for you. If there is something you need from us, please let it be known. And at this point, I'd like to move into questions, discussions, and dialogue.